Well, hello everybody, Happy New Year! We had a great year last year on Tree Lady Talks. We found out we reached 51 countries, so thank you everybody. This week we're going to Australia to speak to Ben Seamark from Forest Tree. So welcome to our first Australian guest. Ben, we're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sharon, for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Ben, tell us how you got involved with trees.
Okay, so I've been involved in trees and I guess horticulture for the past 30 years. When I finished school, I got into horticulture, so did gardening and studied that, ended up into the landscaping industry, worked in the commercial landscaping sector, and then ended up teaching at TAFE. So had the opportunity to teach students there about horticulture and plants, and I guess that's where I really sort of found my love of sharing knowledge and information. And then I went on and did a degree in environmental management, and sort of, I guess, got a greater appreciation for broader population management of trees and the urban environment, as well as introduced to GIS and data analytics, etc. So I then moved into tree management, vegetation management around power lines, essentially, and so then learnt a lot about vegetation compliance, and then became a consulting arborist, and then a urban forestry officer with local government here, managing urban forests, and then co-founded Forestry, which is a tree management software system used over here in Australia to help councils manage trees. So yeah, quite a broad, diverse industry experience, I guess. And I guess when I set out, I didn't know where I was going to end up, but it's certainly taken me lots of places and provided some really great opportunities.
That's really great. And so many arboriculturalists started in horticulture one way or another, but then you went on to do your environmental science degree. But what is the education scene like in Australia for arboriculture? What sort of specific courses do you have?
Yeah, okay. So when I got into it in the 90s, there wasn't actually any courses for arboriculture. We did basic chainsaw training, etc., but there wasn't a specific course on it. A lot of the arborists that came over to Australia were from the UK and taught it because they had you guys had a lot greater, I suppose, improved education or better education than we did. So arboricultural training, I guess, is relatively new. I'm guessing it's probably maybe 15 years or so, 20 years or something like that. And it's very much focused from the sky down, I guess, where horticulture is basically from the ground up. So that's changing. And I've heard you speak a lot about the importance of soils before. And I think that's fundamentally, obviously very, very important. And I think that's becoming more of a focus in arboriculture. The training has really improved, I would say, just watching it, being involved in the industry. And so I think it's got some, it's matured and there's some great opportunities there. So I mean, it's a really complex industry to work in, very broad ranging. So I guess that's evolving and changing as well. And so the education and the training's changing to meet that industry need as well. So.
What I love about arboriculture, it's that glorious mixture of science in every aspect, from soil to physics to biology to chemistry, but it's also so important to understand social science, because so much of what we do is to do with people, their reactions, their emotions about trees, etc. And also we have to be able to communicate well, because sometimes we're the lone voice in a room, aren't we, for trees, with so many other pressures. It's so gloriously multifaceted compared to, say, some other professions. But in Australia, to be an arboriculturalist, do you have to come up through the tools in terms of training? Because I didn't, but I wonder if you can now go in as a degree in urban forestry or arboriculture.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more people they're coming into the industry from the university stream or from other backgrounds, and contributing to the industry in that way. I would say that traditionally it's from the tools up, but I think that's changing, and I think the education needs to probably reflect that, and the training packages reflect that. So I think there's an appreciation that, to do a 3 or 4 year degree in, say, arboriculture, and you're working on the tools, that's 4 years to be dedicated to that, as well as if you're looking at all the other facets that you need to learn, soil sciences and biology and botany and all that sort of stuff. You realistically learn both of those streams comprehensively, you're probably looking at a 10-year degree realistically. So there's a lot of people that have come in from both streams. I came from a bit of a mix of both. But yeah, it's funny what you said about the social science element of it. I think that is definitely becoming a lot more prevalent. The importance of that is huge. When I was first involved in urban forestry management, I had really kind of no appreciation for it. And I soon learned that it's a huge component of it, to the point where today now I literally spend most of my time reading up about human psychology more than I do about botany, to be completely honest with you. Yes. I find it absolutely fascinating. So.
No, absolutely. I remember my early days as a tree officer for local government in my very early 20s, and thinking I was going to help people understand the glory of trees. But in actual fact, I found myself listening and being quite surprised about the multitude of attitudes from people, and trying to manage the dramas that come with particularly neighbours and their trees. I mean, we have the phrase here, and I think you do too, I love trees, but...
Yep. We've all probably heard that a fair bit. And I guess people do generally love trees. I mean, that's why they're such a popular symbol that people gravitate towards. And there's research pieces and all of that in regards to just what trees can do as far as, I suppose, social cohesion, etc. But I guess it's people's general knowledge about trees, their experiences with the trees, and the sense of control around trees. So that's where I kind of come from it. When I'm listening to people talk to me about their concerns with trees, I sort of try to understand what element, one of these three elements, in knowledge, control, or experience, and talk on that point. So we have an aging population here where I live, and with that we have people who feel like they have less control in regards to their abilities to be able to get up in the gutters and clean those, remove the debris, etc. So that becomes an issue for them. And so I guess it's, looking at solutions for that. So it might also just be that we have people who have purchased a property who have never had a tree before, so they're a bit fearful because they don't have the knowledge about what that tree, how big that tree is going to grow, etc. So yeah, it really is just as important to understand where people are coming from, and like you said, listen to what they have to say, and try to communicate with them in regards to how they might, I suppose, perceive the tree slightly differently, as opposed to just this is a tree that requires, I don't know, some sort of remedial pruning or something like that. So it's definitely a broad area. You still have to obviously know all of that those cultural requirements and the understanding of the trees. But to understand people is realistically probably one of the most important parts of arboriculture, in my opinion. So.
I agree, because often, particularly the older generation, may be fearful about the size of a tree and think that it needs to be pruned for its own sake, or that height is bad or big is bad, and actually create more problems by having a very bad tree surgery carried out. Going back to education, I wonder, in terms of diversity in Australia, are there many women and many ethnic minorities involved with arboriculture?
Yeah, I can't talk for the industry, but I can talk from my perspective in regards to, there's definitely what I see is there's an increase in female participation in arboriculture, which I think is absolutely fantastic and needed. There's definitely more diversity in regards to different cultural backgrounds, and Yeah, but there's definitely a huge skill shortage as well. So we're really
Yes.
having trouble attracting the skills that we require over here. And I guess we're trying to poach them from you and bring them out to Australia too.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies, but come to
No,
Australia
no,
and
no, it's fine.
yeah, come to the sun and the oceans and the sea and live in Australia for a while and help us look after our
Sounds
trees.
terrible.
So, no, we definitely yeah, COVID sort of put a bit of a stop to that for a little while, but I think any arborists that are living in the UK that are looking for some work in Adelaide wouldn't have too many problems getting the opportunity if they reach out and yeah, speak to the industry out here. So
Oh, that's really interesting to know. Well, going back to diversity in the UK, I mean, I think about just over 10% are women now,
yep. Oh
but
wow.
it's still really, really low.
Yeah.
But actually, many of the women who are in arboriculture tend to be quite senior. So there's been a lot of those women tend to be fairly prominent, actually, including myself, who's a terrible show off. Um,
Yeah.
but we definitely need more ethnic diversity representation.
Yes.
But you mentioned Australia there. I'm afraid I've never been. Tell us about where you live and what the treescape and the tree species population is.
Yeah, okay. So I'm from Adelaide, which is South Australia. So if you're looking at Australia on a map, it's sort of basically look to the centre and then goes straight down to the bottom and basically hit the ocean. So we're the driest continent. Australia is, and South Australia is the driest state within the driest continent. And then Adelaide, where the city is, where I live and work, is the driest of all the cities here in Australia. So we have a changing landscape, treescape. It was established initially, realistically, when the city was first planned and designed with a lot of elm trees and the typical European sort of, I suppose, look and feel. They've, I guess, become less suited to our urban landscape, and we're sort of moving into different species now. So I guess we're in the second or third generation of our tree stock here. But what you'd find if you're walking down the streets is, yeah, a lot of European trees. So a lot of trees that you'd probably also find somewhere like in California, as well as a mix of a lot of our Australian gum trees and native trees as well. So unfortunately, the gum tree's got a pretty bad rap here in Australia as being a dangerous tree. But I think that's probably more reflective of its dominance in the landscape and its age, as opposed to the species itself. So I'm guessing where you are, the oak tree, I guess, is probably the older tree in the tree population, one of the older ones in the parks and reserves, and therefore it is probably the one that's known as dropping branches, etc. And probably looking for a little bit more TLC. Well, that's probably, I'd say, the same with our gum trees.
Yeah.
And some of our gum trees are, 3, 4, 500, 600 years old, sort of, and older, that are still present in the landscape. And they're really, really important trees for habitat for wildlife, as well as just obviously carbon storage and cooling of benefits and all that sort of stuff. And they're a very long-lived hardwooded tree that unfortunately are being replaced now with more European trees, smaller European trees that are shorter lived and really don't provide the same benefits. So, I mean, my personal opinion is I'd love to see a resurgence of the gum tree and our native trees back into the landscape. But unfortunately, I guess, yeah, what I'm seeing is more smaller European trees, being planted again and us traveling down the same mistakes we made, 100 years ago or so. So, yeah.
Is that partly a function of the fact that more people are living in cities and there's a hunger for land, so properties tend to be smaller and yards, as you say, tend to be smaller and therefore more suited to smaller trees. Is that because of that mainly?
Yeah, I think so. I think yeah, we're not really providing the space for the trees, and that's causing issues and conflicts. And I think it's the general fear of larger trees as being, I guess, the problem, if you like. So it's a bit like the elephant in the room. If there's an issue with paving or pipes or anything like that, it's most people point to the big tree and say it must be the big tree over there that's causing all the issues, and then the tree's removed and the issues still continue. And I think it's kind of like that. It's the elephant. Is that the right term? I'm not sure. It's the
Yeah, it is.
the
It
elephant in the
is.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're being removed because they're seen as the problem, and that's a domino effect, unfortunately, and it's replaced to smaller trees because there's less space then. So yeah, highly contested spaces for trees is definitely leading to smaller trees, but I think also historically, at least, lack of appreciation for what the big trees do in regards to providing the benefits. I mean, big trees are actually in the long term cheaper to maintain. They're more cost effective to maintain than the smaller trees. And also, carbon neutrality comes at around 30 years for a tree, and those smaller trees are really realistically have a life expectancy of about 30 to 50 years compared to an older sort of mature tree that might be a couple hundred years old that still has a couple hundred years to live. Obviously, the cost saving benefits to the public are a lot better with a larger tree. So I'm a big advocate for big trees where there's space to have them, and if not, designing so that there is space for those bigger trees.
I totally agree with you, but I mean, one of the absolute benefits of a large canopy tree is the shade. But I'm guessing it gets pretty hot where you live. Urban cooling must be so important.
Yeah, without doubt. Yesterday it was 29 degrees here, which is a pretty sort of average day for this time of year. We'll reach 40 degrees without too many problems, and yeah, you see most everybody looking for now with Christmas and shopping and what have you, having everybody trying to park their car under the shade of a big tree. So they're very popular when when they're providing that shade. Probably not so popular when
Yes.
other times, but it's just as a side note, it was quite interesting when Adelaide was planned, because it's one of the park cities of the sort of the design era of the early 19th century, I suppose, where they designed cities around gardens and parks. The trees were used really were planted as sort of a functional component of mobility for allowing people to walk around, and because transport, people were, there was a lot more people walking and, riding horses and all that sort of stuff. So the trees were seen really as a really important function of a city to get people out and about, and for all the benefits. And I guess we're sort of almost coming a full, 360, where we're now just starting to recognise or again appreciate the benefits trees provide to cities, which they always have. They have for hundreds of years, and it's great to see more talk about their cooling effects and, like you said, the shade and all the benefits that they provide to our urban areas.
So, how has this affected public policy in terms of trees? Do you see that changing for the good?
Yes, I do. We've got a few things happening now, reviewing the policies around tree management here, and I think there's definitely a growing interest, or should I say, there's some really good indicators to show that we're trying to do better in the spaces of protection of trees, as well as planning to include trees. It's I'd love to see more, obviously, but yeah, I think there's definitely a growing awareness, and I think that's just not here. I think that's just globally. Essentially, I think there's a greater appreciation for trees, around the world, and I think, again, that's what I love about trees as well, because trees are a great icon for the environment in general. And I think I'm probably a bit of an environmentalist in regards to my background, and I think trees are a great talking point. If people can talk about a tree, then we can start looking at what's under the tree and what's around the tree, and then we can start having the bigger, broader environmental conversations as well. So trees I think, indicate a change to the way that people see and perceive and wish to interact with the environment.
So that's good to know. And I'm always fascinated when I speak to somebody from a different country about the laws protecting trees. So In the city of Adelaide, if somebody wanted to fell a tree in their back garden, would there be any restrictions?
Yes, there are. It's not an easy answer, this one, because the legislation over here is so complicated, and it's been
It is in the UK
yes,
too, so
yes,
that's
okay.
okay.
All right. Well, yes, if the tree's got a certain trunk circumference, a DBH, diameter breast height, it triggers it to maybe be considered for protection. But then there's a rule where it depends on certain species and certain distance from swimming pools and houses, etc. To the point where I think the legislation has become not very efficient. And there is actually an inquiry at the moment looking at the legislation and how the government can better improve the protection of trees. So, yes, there is protection. I think it's not, or it's been shown that it's not very effective, and there's change on the horizon. So, which is a good thing. So, hopefully, it's not too late though, because we're losing lots of big trees while everybody's sort of trying to work out what to do about it. But yes, we do. Yep, we do have protection.
And so that's enforced by the local government or the municipality tree officers.
That's correct. Yeah, so that would be administrated by the local councils. Yeah, and so if a resident sees a tree that's been chopped down that they're concerned about, they can contact them, and then the councils go out and have a look and determine whether that tree is protected or not. But yes, it would be great to see greater protections, because we are experiencing a loss of urban greening, unfortunately.
And in terms of development, what must a developer do in terms of existing trees and planting new trees?
Okay, yeah, so that's a little bit of an area that's outside of my expertise, but at the moment there is a requirement under some recently new planning laws that the developer must plant a tree or must allow a space for a tree, and if they can't, then they have to contribute funds to the government to help plant more trees. So that's how it kind of works over here.
So, is there a role for arboriculturalists in terms of development? For example, does the local authority look for a detailed tree report saying which trees are there at the moment, what's staying, what's going, and how are we going to look after what's staying?
Yes, yeah. So that's the private consulting side of the industry, which I used to be involved in. And yeah, there's companies that do provide that service where they'll go out and they'll look at greenfield sites, or they'll look at existing development sites, assess the vegetation there, determine what's protected and what's not, and then provide that information back to the planning authority or back to the developer. And we use the Australian standard, which is called AS 4970 2009, which is the protection of trees on development sites. And I guess that's the guiding document used by consulting arborists to determine, what the impacts are going to be on that tree, what protection measures are required around it, and the long-term management of those trees after development as well. So that's the guiding principle document that arborists use.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to check that out online because we have BS 5837. So it's interesting to. I love finding out the differences. And what about on the forest scale, outside of reserves? Are there any protection there for, let's say, a landowner who's got a small woodland on his or her land? Can they just fell it, or is there protection?
Yeah, no, there's protection there as well. That's under the Native Vegetation Act over here. And so, yeah, there's rules and regulations around that. So people can't just go in and clear their land, which is a practice that used to occur sort of, I guess, prior to the 80s. But yeah, we've got greater protection now. And yeah, again, an appreciation for trees in the landscape.
Oh, right. So going back to the climate, we're on Zoom and you've got a beautiful background,
Yep.
which I can see is a real one,
Yes, it
of a
is.
balcony. And beyond
Yep.
that, it's all green. So what sort of watering problems do you have? Or do you just rely on the very scant rainfall that you do have and have a species that can tolerate it?
I think we're relying upon selecting species that are going to live, particularly in the streets. We're relying on picking the trees that are going to survive drought conditions, essentially. And when we've just come, well, we about 4 or 5 years ago, we just came out of a 10-year drought. So we were losing lots of street trees through that drought. These trees were relying on front yards so people's gardens out the front, and we had water restrictions, so people weren't allowed to water their gardens. So we had trees dying through drought basically. So there's been a shift since then where there's a greater emphasis on picking species that are drought tolerant. But yeah, I'm lucky here where I'm sitting talking to you right now because I'm surrounded by national parks. So so that's why I'm quite fortunate. So I've got, all I see is from my house is treetops. So I'm very lucky.
Oh gosh, that sounds absolutely lovely.
Well, you have to come to Adelaide. We have a conference here every year called TreeNet Conference. We also have an Australian Arboriculture Conference as well.
I'd love to.
But so we have two sort of conferences that you should try to line up a trip here to Australia and come and visit. I encourage anybody who is looking to come to visit Australia is to come when either TreeNet conference is on or the Australian Arboricultural Conference, and come and meet fellow arborists.
This week's episode is sponsored by Tree Radar UK Limited. Tree Radar is a ground-penetrating radar specialising in detecting roots without the need to dig up the ground. It will pick up any root as thick as your thumb and above and map it. Tree Radar UK's director is Ian Lee. I've worked with Ian for many years and I consider him to be one of the world's leading experts, not only in scanning but importantly in sensitive interpretation when the ground conditions are challenging. So you can find them at treeradaruk.com, and you can see Ian in action at our conference, more of which at the end of the podcast. So you were a local government officer for a long time. Tell us about some of the public outreach and citizen science projects you got involved in.
Yeah, so when I was managing the urban forest for the city of Burnside here in Adelaide, we set up a citizen science projects, or a number of them, to help get the community to help with the management of our trees. And so that was a really great project. So they basically came in and helped collect data and information on trees, and we ran education sessions in the evenings for them. So on different topics, like it might have been trees and habitat, or selecting tree species, or pruning, or whatever it may be. So it was a bit of an educational piece, as well as giving them the opportunity to go out and basically be the eyes and the ears on the urban forest. So I think citizen science is a great opportunity for councils to not only get additional help to manage the urban forest, but to use it as an opportunity to educate the community as well, who then can go out and provide education to their neighbours and their friends, etc. And so it sort of has that knock-on effect as well. And it's just a great opportunity for people to meet each other in their local community as well. So I was really proud of that initiative. I believe it's still going today, and for any so what do you call it, an urban forest officer out there who are looking to, I suppose, try some new initiatives or looking for a bit of help, I'd definitely have a look at citizen science projects and getting something like that up and going.
Yes, I mean, we were talking to James, a New York City Parks tree officer, the other day, and he has a similar thing. And I did a similar thing. When I was a tree officer, we have a scheme called the Tree Warden Scheme. Am I right in thinking that Burnside was the first tree city of the world?
Yes, that's what we were told. Yeah, we were told that we were the first. We provided the first successful application lodged. And where I'm from here in Adelaide, in South Australia, we had three cities that became tree cities of the world when that first was initiated, and they were all from Adelaide. So we're very proud of that, to be living in a state where we have three councils that became tree cities of the world, which really shows that here in South Australia we really love our trees.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant, brilliant. I'm interested in forestry. Tell us about forestry.
Yeah.
This is forestry,
that's right.
not forestry.
Yes, that's right. Forestry was TREE on the end. So yeah, forestry, I guess, was an initiative in recognition for, I guess, the need to improve the way that we manage trees. And I guess it was through the experiences of my environmental management experience to look at sort of how we could better manage trees as populations, as well as being in the industry for a while and seeing a lot of information leaving the industry as well. So I worked with some really amazing arborists who were very, very knowledgeable, and they got to the age where they retire, and that information left with them, I guess. So I was really keen to sort of capture that information, and was fortunate enough to help co-fund forestry, which is now being used by a number of councils right across Australia. And yeah, it was really sort of, I guess, from the desire to look at how can we better manage trees and learn from the management of the trees. So in the future arborists can sort of look at what we've done well and what mistakes we've made by capturing all that information and sharing that information with the public as well.
That's wonderful. So perhaps you could describe the various facets of the program itself.
Okay, yeah. So basically, managing the urban forest, for those who haven't managed an urban forest, is actually quite a complicated, I suppose, process. You've got all of your suppliers who have to provide the trees that you wish to plant. You have to identify whereabouts you want to plant. You have to determine which species are going to suit in certain areas. There's lots of compliance involved around managing the urban forest. And there's lots of opportunities to do data analytics to work out what's working well and what's not working well. So forestry was essentially built to help provide a tool for urban forestry officers to sort of, I guess, take control of the urban forest and to facilitate all of those different elements and all those different supply chains to help improve the management of the urban forest with basically less resources. So it's, yeah, realistically is there to, yeah, be used as a tool to help make the job easier.
And so I've looked on the website and they're very clear GIS mapping with colour coding that people can log in. I mean, citizens can log in themselves, can't they, and see what's happening in their area?
Yes, well, what we've done is we've built a couple of websites for council using the forestry data, so that all of the management of the trees by the council is done through forestry, and then we can build, or they can build, websites from that data, a bit like the City of London's or the City of Melbourne's or the City of Burnside have one called Urban Forest Interactive, and they use data to then present that to the community. So that can take any shape or form. It's really left up to the imagination of the councils themselves to present the data in the way that they wish to present it to residents, basically. So forestry is realistically built to be used by contractors and urban forestry officers on the ground to collect all of that data and that information, which then can be presented to the public in any shape, way, or form. So there's some great examples of some fantastic websites that you're probably well aware of now that have been done not just by forestry, but by numerous other companies and cities around the world, providing information and data to their communities, which is helping them better understand, I suppose, the nature of urban forestry management.
I watched a presentation in preparation for this podcast, and I understand that it can actually give live updates on, say, watering requirements for young trees every 15 minutes.
Oh, yes, that's right. So that's the City of Marion's public website, which was built by forestry, and yeah, that's exactly right. So people can look online and see the tree that's out the front of their property and see what's happened, what maintenance activities have occurred on that tree, whether it's been watered, and I think what's really important about that website and others similar to it is it helps to sort of demonstrate the effort and the work that councils put into managing the urban forest as well, which gives, I think, a greater sense of trust and appreciation for all the work, the great work that councils do. And so that's part of that, and it also obviously helps to communicate the resource requirements of managing those assets.
So, in other words, still in the UK, sometimes a tree officer job is under threat. So, if somebody leaves, they may not be replaced, which I find utterly astonishing and appalling. But presumably, with something like forestry, the managers or the political decision makers can see just what you do at a glance rather than just being some officer off in the corner of a dark office who does something with trees. It's IT heavy,
Yes.
and yet it's really clear to use, so it's accessible for any policy decision maker. So I'm hope that such a program might lead to more resources for the tree department. Have you got any anecdotal sort of knowledge of that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. You're 100% correct. So forestry was built, I guess, a little bit in my frustration from when I was working as a city arborist, without having the data to be able to communicate the assets that we have. So obviously roads and bridges and buildings and that, there's information on that. And so people managing those assets can often provide information which then can provide them the resources they need to manage those assets, where unfortunately for a lot of councils, the tree officer doesn't have that data in hand, and it's really up to them just to sort of explain, I guess, and ask for more money or resources without actually having the quantitative data behind them. Products like forestry can help them get that data, and when you have the data on the urban forest, it really is often the largest asset that council owns and manages, and it provides one of the greatest benefits to the community as well. It's an appreciating asset. So when you spend money on it, it actually makes more money for you. And when you sort of talk in those terms, it's a lot easier to get those resources required than when you're sort of just saying, listen, I've got a lot of trees and I need more money, basically. So
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the principles of forestry, is to help those tree officers communicate the resource requirements they need.
Yes, and that's what I'm hearing more and more, which is so encouraging, is that people are beyond us, are beginning to understand it's one of the only assets, well, it's the only asset that grows. And when you start talking about figures, and then we've got all the benefit of iTree and all the facts and figures that come from that, and any other valuation system, we have CAVET here in the UK. Look, this is going to improve. This asset is going up in value. Therefore, keep investing because it's a win-win-win, and it will help you achieve some climate change targets, etc. So that's really, really encouraging. But I wonder really, does the culture of local government promote itself enough? You know, generally ARBs and local government officers tend to be quite modest, and does something like forestry really help communicate where one might naturally be quite reticent or shy?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and a great point. I think you're 100% again correct. The data helps provide the arborist an opportunity to sort of demonstrate the work that they do, and yeah, it really provides them an opportunity to share that information with others without really having to, do much more than that, simply to present the data. Most of the cities here, will have 40,000, 100,000 assets, maybe, 100 or 200 different types of assets within that, just in the genuses alone. And so it starts becoming very complicated information and data to communicate. And, it's not an easy task to manage, and to be able to present that information to others really does, I think, help demonstrate the importance and the complexity of the role. And I think it definitely helps provide, I think, council officers who are managing trees are a lot more respected, because people can see how the asset that they're managing and the importance of that to the community.
And you absolutely got to know what you've got already before you can plan for the future. And I listened to a very interesting webinar with the London Borough of Barnet in London recently about their tree planting programme, which was based on initially a study which identified gaps in the streetscape and then looked at the other constraints in the street that might prevent a tree.
Yeah.
And that led to a really informed and cost-effective and highly effective tree planting programme. And that because they knew exactly what they're planted where, they also, because you've got the data on what you've already got, and you might think, right, what additional species should we have here? All of this scientific evidence helps better informed and more cost-effective decision-making, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, definitely. And there's a greater push for species diversity and increasing the type of species that we grow. And so forestry was built to help with that, specifically to give lead time for nurseries to actually grow the trees. So that's one of the constraints of increasing species diversity, is the fact that the nursery industry won't grow something unless there's a order for it or there's a demand for it. So forestry enables you to determine your planting palette sort of 10 years in advance, and then put those orders to the nursery in advance so that they have confidence that they're going to grow these trees for a council or for a number of councils. And that helps the industry support our initiatives to increase species diversity, which wasn't possible before we had that data.
It's such a good point, because it's a huge risky investment for a nursery to start planting species that aren't ordinarily planted. And from a commercial point of view, which they have to be commercial, why would they risk planting something? But if the data, such as forestry, says we know we need this particular species, okay, we've not been planting much of that, but we're going to buy these from you. And what a wonderful business security for them. And has that led to a growth of nurseries in terms of the number of nurseries, and also those nurseries just feeling stronger and employing more people?
Yeah, I can't talk on that because I don't work in that industry, but I'll definitely say it would have that effect. The other thing I think as well, I was just thinking while you were talking there, was the selecting a species for an arborist working for council to select a species. They take a lot of the risk in the species that they select, because if they're trying to put a tree in that might be a little bit different to what's normally planted, because they're trying to, say, increase the species diversity, they take a risk if that tree fails, or if it doesn't, if it drops a branch or whatever. But if they have the data available to them to make that informed decision, then they can, I suppose, reduce their risk, because they can say, well, I'm making this decision to plant this tree based on what the data is telling me. And that's really important, I think, rather than it becoming an individual's decision making and taking all the risk, which I think is one of the issues around urban forestry management, and probably one of the frustrations of a arborist working for a council, is they need to put their neck on the line essentially to make a lot of these decisions. And if they don't have the data, it's a big risk. But if they have the data, they can make those decisions with confidence and knowledge. If you just Google forestry, forestry with TREE at the end, you should be able to find it, basically. So it's quite easy. Just put into Google search forestry, and it should pop up there.
And is it available throughout the world or just in Australia?
I'm so glad you asked. I know we're basically in Australia, but we'd love to have a council in the UK using it. So if there's any councils there that are interested in giving it a go, feel free to reach out and contact us. You can just email me, ben@forestry.com.au. I'm more than happy to have a chat. It's applicable to all councils, because we all share the same issues in regards to tree management. We've got a big growing interest of councils from around the world who are interested in looking at it. And I think they see the benefits of using data to help manage their trees.
You see, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. The more people I have the privilege to speak to, and I learned that we've got the same issues over and over again. Not enough people coming into industry, but we're all trying really hard with that. And same issues with poor funding, lack of understanding. But what comes across most of all is a collective excitement, ambition, and we're all rather brilliant, actually. So on that note, Ben, what is your dream scenario?
That's a great question. I think what the reason I suppose helped build forestry was I wanted to see a greater appreciation for trees, and I also wanted to help pass knowledge on to future arborists so that trees can be better managed into the future. So my aspiration or dream would be that arborists in the future can have a greater access to knowledge so they can make better decisions and we can have greener cities.
Thank you, Ben Seamark from South Australia. Thank you so much for being our first Australian guest. And it's been so fascinating to hear about what's different and what's the same.
Thanks a lot for having me, and we hope to see you here in Australia.
And just before we go, time to tell you about our very exciting new conference in February 2024.
Trees, planning and construction. Is it really working? Do you feel isolated? Well, this conference plans to change that. We're here at BS 5837 Speed Briefing. Biodiversity net gain, what does it mean for trees? And trees and planning law, are you up to date? Sarah Dodd will tell us. Hear from keynote speaker Keith Saker and Jeremy Barrell. We'll hear the views of London Tree Officer John Ryan on what works well and ideas for the future, and a panel of experts, a planning consultant, highway engineer, demolition contractor and building contractor, and I will be saying what works for me. All this and outdoor demonstrations on the 20th of February 2024 here at Braxted Park. And thanks to our headline sponsors, Bartram Trees, we're offering cut price tickets for tree officers. See us at Sharon Hosegood Associates /training or Eventbrite Trees, Planning and Construction.